The footage you are about to see is a reconstruction. It has been pieced together from 3 recovered hard drives found in a pawn shop in Ely, Nevada. The original video files, labeled AETHERIA OBSCURA Episode 14, were largely corrupted, but the audio logs kept by audio technician Maya Flores remained mostly intact. Her story, corroborated by fragments of video featuring her partner, Vance, is one of a discovery so profound and so terrifying that they chose to bury it. They were right to. Some doors are never meant to be opened. Some calls for help should never be answered. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The world has teeth in the places people forget. That's what Leo used to say, grinning into the camera lens, his voice a smooth, confident balm against the peeling paint and creeping decay of whatever abandoned place we were exploring that week. He loved the forgotten places. For me, it wasn't about the thrill, but the silence. As an audio technician, I'm drawn to the absence of sound, and there is no silence more profound, more absolute, than in a place that has been utterly left behind by humanity. Our target was a ghost, a myth in the Urbex community, listening post Station Epsilon. Decommissioned in the late 1980s, tucked away in the sprawling, desolate heart of the Nevada desert, it was rumored to be more than just a Cold War relic. The official story was that it was a tropospheric scatter communications site, bouncing signals off the upper atmosphere. The rumors, the ones that drew us there, whispered of something else. They said Epsilon wasn't built to listen to the Russians, it was built to listen up. We arrived in Leo's battered Ford Bronco, the suspension groaning under the weight of our gear. The station was a concrete cancer on the landscape, a low, brutalist bunker, half swallowed by the sand, crowned with a bizarre array of skeletal, rust-streaked antennas pointed at the empty blue sky. The concrete ear, Leo christened it for the camera, his voice booming with the manufactured charisma that had earned our web series, AETHERIA OBSCURA, its modest but dedicated following. Built to listen for the whispers of a world on the brink of apocalypse. But what if it heard something else? I followed him, my heavy-duty Pelican case full of audio equipment banging against my leg. "Let's just try not to get tetanus, okay, Leo?" I murmured, more to myself than to him. He was already in his element, his camera a natural extension of his arm, documenting the faded warning signs and the heavy steel door that stood ajar, a dark mouth in the concrete face. The air inside was shockingly cold, a dead, sterile chill that had nothing to do with the desert heat outside. It was a tomb for technology. Racks of decaying electronic equipment lined the corridors, their faces a mess of dead dials and severed wires. In the dust-choked offices, we found logbooks, their pages filled with precise, technical handwriting. But the most important entries, the ones detailing operational status or signal acquisition, were redacted with thick black marker, leaving behind gaping holes in the history of the place. On one wall, a map of the antenna arrays showed complex, overlapping fields of reception, all focused on a single, empty point in the cosmos. It felt less like science and more like prayer. Leo was in heaven, narrating every discovery with dramatic flair. I was less comfortable. My sensitive microphones, designed to pick up the faintest sound, were registering almost nothing. The silence here was different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, oppressive. It was the sound of a held breath, a silence that felt like it was actively listening. We found the heart of the station after an hour of exploration, the primary control room. It was a circular chamber, its walls lined with sound-dampening foam that was now crumbling like old cork. In the center of the room, on a raised dais, sat the prize. It was a radio console, but unlike any I had ever seen. It wasn't a standard military-issue piece of equipment. It was custom-built, a beautiful, terrifying behemoth of polished wood and gleaming chrome, studded with a bewildering array of unlabeled inputs and glowing vacuum tubes that looked almost organic. Its centerpiece was a large, heavy tuning dial, marked not with frequencies, but with a series of complex, astrological-looking symbols. Compared to the decay around it, the console was almost pristine, as if the dust itself was afraid to settle on it. And then we saw the warning. Scrawled above the console, gouged into the plaster of the wall by a desperate hand, were 5 words in thick, dusty capitals. They were a stark, primal scream against the calculated engineering of the room. It listens back. If you find the old radio, don't turn it on. I felt a cold dread snake its way up my spine, a primal fear that resonated with the oppressive silence of the bunker. My hand instinctively went to my audio recorder, as if to capture the feeling, the sheer weight of that warning. Leo just laughed. It was a booming, echoing sound in the dead space. He swung the camera around, zooming in on the message, then back to his own excited face. "Incredible," he breathed, his eyes alight with the fire of discovery. "This is it, Maya. This is the centerpiece, the hook. Our viewers are going to lose their minds." He looked from the warning to the console, a reckless grin spreading across his face. "Leo, no," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Did you not just read that? We should listen to it." "Listen to what? The ramblings of some spooked technician from 40 years ago?" he scoffed, already running his hands over the smooth, cold surface of the radio. "This is atmosphere, Maya. This is production value. We came here for a story. Well, this is the best damn story we're ever going to find." He looked at the giant unmarked power switch, then at me, his eyes gleaming. "And we're not leaving until we hear the end of it." An argument in a normal place is just an argument. An argument in a concrete tomb 40 feet underground feels like sacrilege. "Absolutely not, Leo," I insisted, my voice sharp, cutting through the thick silence. I placed myself between him and the console. "This is a bad idea. Every instinct I have is screaming at me that we should leave this thing alone." "Your instincts are what make you a great audio tech, May," he said, trying to be placating, his showman's charm now grating on my frayed nerves. "You're cautious, you're methodical. That's why I need you. But right now, you need to trust my instincts as a host. And my instincts say that turning on this radio is the single most important thing we could do." He gestured around the room. "The story isn't the bunker. The story is this. Why it was built, what it was for. The warning on the wall isn't a threat, it's an invitation. It's a warning, Leo. It's written in plain English." "And it's perfect," he shot back, his excitement overriding his reason. "Don't you see? The mystery, the danger, that's the hook. Brave urban explorers find a haunted radio at a top-secret military base. The title writes itself." His logic was infuriatingly circular, focused only on the narrative he was building for our viewers. He saw the world through a camera lens, and in his viewfinder, danger was just another word for content. The argument was pointless. I knew that look in his eye. He was going to do it, with or without my approval. Defeated, I stepped aside, my arms crossed tightly against my chest. "Fine," I bit out, "but I'm recording everything. Audio, video, the whole spectrum. When some Cold War-era ghost starts speaking in Russian, I want it on the record." "Atta girl," he grinned, already tracing wires from the back of the console to a nearby junction box. He found a heavy-duty backup power conduit, likely for emergencies. With a grunt, he hauled a thick, snake-like cable over and, after a few sparks and a muttered curse, jammed it into one of the console's unlabeled ports. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence pressed back in, heavier than before. Leo held his breath, his hand hovering over the large, ominous power switch. I stood back, my fingers nervously adjusting the gain on my audio recorder, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He flipped the switch. There was a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate not just in my ears, but in the bones of my skull. A series of vacuum tubes along the console's back panel flickered to life, bathing the room in a warm, sickly orange glow. The speakers, 2 large circular grills on either side of the tuning dial, crackled once, then settled into a low, clean static.
It was a pristine white noise, purer than any I had ever heard, a sound like rushing water from a river that didn't exist. Leo was ecstatic, a triumphant grin plastered across his face. "We have power! Can you believe this thing still works?" "I'm more concerned with why it still works," I muttered, already plugging my recorder's main line into a small output jack I'd found on the console. I slipped on my professional-grade headphones, isolating myself with the sound. Through my equipment, the static was immense, a universe of sound without feature or form. Leo leaned over the console, his hands gripping the strange, uncalibrated tuning dial. It was heavy, and it moved with a series of satisfying, oily clicks. "All right, let's see who's home," he said, mostly to the camera he'd set on a tripod to capture the moment. He began to turn the dial slowly, methodically. The static shifted. We passed through the ghost of an old AM station playing what sounded like Hank Williams, then the faint, indecipherable chatter of a shortwave broadcast. These were familiar sounds, terrestrial echoes trapped in the machine. Leo kept turning. He moved past the familiar bands into the territory marked by the strange arcane symbols. And then it happened. In a very specific, incredibly narrow band on the dial, the clean white noise vanished. It was replaced by something else, something that made the hair on my arm stand on end. It wasn't a language, it wasn't music. It was a complex, layered soundscape. A chorus of faint, melodic clicks, like pebbles dropping into a deep well. A series of harmonic chimes, clear and pure, like resonating crystal. And underneath it all, a deep, resonant hum that was profoundly, achingly sorrowful. The sounds were structured, repeating in complex, mathematical patterns. It was communication, of that I was certain, but it was utterly, completely alien. Leo gasped. "What is that? A number station? Some kind of military cipher?" He was excited, but for the first time, a note of genuine awe had entered his voice. I pulled off my headphones, my hands shaking. The sound filled the room, a ghostly, ethereal symphony. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "That's not military, Leo. The structure is too complex. The frequencies, some of them are outside the normal human range. My gear is picking up harmonics I can't even hear." I stared at the console, at the glowing tubes that were the source of this impossible broadcast. Leo saw it as a discovery, a puzzle to be solved. I heard it for what it was. I heard the deep, pervasive sadness in that carrier wave hum. I heard the despot complexity in the clicking chorus. We hadn't tuned in to a secret government broadcast. We had tuned in to a requiem. We had found a signal from a dead or dying world. And the sound was the most heartbreaking thing I had ever heard. My professional instincts warred with my primal fear. As an audio engineer, I was captivated. The signal was a goldmine of acoustic impossibilities. Its structure was mathematical, elegant, and deeply complex. It was a language of pure sound, devoid of syntax or grammar as we understood it. Yet it was undeniably conveying information. But as a human being standing in a concrete box buried in the desert, I was terrified. The profound sadness of the broadcast was a weight, a palpable force in the room. It felt like eavesdropping on a funeral. Leo, however, was past the point of caution. He was a pioneer on a new frontier. "This is it," he kept whispering, pacing around the console. "This is bigger than anything. Roswell, Voyager's golden record. This is real. This is happening right now." I was busy hooking my laptop to my recorder, initiating a spectral analysis program. On the screen, the sound bloomed into a visual marvel. The deep hum was a stable, solid baseline, while the clicks and chimes were sharp, intricate spikes and waves, forming patterns of staggering complexity. "Leo, whatever this is, it's old," I said, pointing to the screen. "The signal shows no signs of Doppler shift. That means either the source is stationary relative to us, which is impossible, or it's not traveling through space in a way we understand, or it's coming from everywhere at once. That thought did nothing to calm my nerves, but it only fueled Leo's obsession. "We have to interact," he declared. "We have to let them know we're here." "Them? Leo, we don't know who they are, and the warning on the wall explicitly says it listens back." "Exactly, so let's give it something to listen to." Before I could protest further, he located a vintage microphone attached to the console by a thick, coiled cord. It was a heavy, chrome thing shaped like a pill. He flicked a switch on its base, and a small light on the console flickered, indicating an open channel. My blood ran cold. The broadcast, the sorrowful chorus of clicks and chimes, continued unabated from the speakers. Leo leaned in, his face inches from the microphone. He took a deep breath, the charismatic host taking center stage for the most important broadcast of his life. "Hello," he said, his voice steady, but I could hear the tremor of adrenaline beneath it. "Is anyone there? My name is Leo. We can hear you." For a long, tense moment, the alien soundscape continued unchanged. The clicks and chimes echoed in the chamber, the mournful hum a constant presence. I felt a small, foolish surge of relief. Maybe it was just a recording, a message in a bottle floating through the static. Then it faltered. The complex, mathematical rhythm of the broadcast stuttered and broke. The clicks became erratic. The chimes fell silent. The deep hum wavered like a dying breath. For 5 seconds, the speakers emitted only that pure, clean static. The bunker was silent again, save for our own ragged breathing. And then, a new sound emerged. It came from the speakers, a clumsy, distorted, but utterly unmistakable sound. It was a series of clicks and chimes, but they weren't random. They were arranged in a new pattern, a clumsy, hesitant, but recognizable attempt to replicate the sound waves of Leo's voice. It was a phonetic sculpture built from alien noise. Click, chime, hum, click. It was the shape of the word hello. We stared at the speakers, horrified and mesmerized. It wasn't mimicry in the way a parrot mimics. It wasn't a recording. It was an analysis. Something on the other end had heard the sound of his voice, deconstructed its acoustic properties, and was now attempting to rebuild it using its own sonic vocabulary. It was the sound of something intelligent, something alien, and it was trying to learn. Did you hear that?" Leo whispered, his face pale. "It heard you," I corrected, my voice barely audible. My earlier fear was now crystallizing into a specific, targeted terror. The connection is two-way, Leo. It's a stable channel. Stunned into silence, we simply listened. A minute passed. I coughed, a small, dry sound in the tense air. Immediately, the alien chorus paused, and then from the speakers came a short, sharp burst of clicks that perfectly mimicked the percussive sound of my cough. Leo, fumbling with his camera, dropped a lens cap on the concrete floor. The small plastic clatter was met with an instant of silence, followed by a series of high-frequency chimes that replicated the sound with chilling accuracy. We were in a feedback loop. We were in a conversation. Every sound we made, every word we spoke, every shuffle of our feet on the dusty floor was being captured, analyzed, and replicated. We weren't just explorers who had stumbled upon a strange broadcast. We were lab rats. And the intelligent, unseen entities on that impossible connection, the listeners, as they instantly became in my mind, were learning about our world, one sound at a time. They were learning the physics of our reality through the vibrations we made in the air, and we had just taught them how to speak.
The line between discovery and contamination was terrifyingly thin. With the radio on, the very air in the bunker began to change. It grew heavy, charged with a palpable static electricity that made the fine hairs on my skin stand up. The clean, recycled air now carried the metallic tang of ozone, as if a lightning storm were brewing within the concrete walls. Both Leo and I developed pounding headaches, a dull, persistent ache behind the eyes that seemed to throb in time with the radio's mournful hum. Worse were the auditory hallucinations. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion, my brain playing tricks on me. But even when I retreated to a storage room down the hall to check our gear, I could hear them. Faint, phantom sounds at the edge of my hearing. A single, melodic click that sounded like it was right behind me. A crystalline chime that seemed to echo from the ventilation shaft above. The listeners were no longer just in the radio. They were starting to bleed into the silence, like an echo of a sound that hadn't been made yet. Their learning curve was exponential, and it was horrifying. What began as clumsy, single-word mimicry rapidly evolved into something far more sophisticated. They were no longer just repeating sounds, they were chaining them together, associating them. During one tense exchange, Leo said, "I need to check the power source." A few seconds later, the speakers crackled and produced a flawless, click-and-chimed replica of his entire sentence. The cadence, the inflection, the brief pause between words, it was all there, rendered in their alien phonetics. It sounded like a machine dreaming of human speech. They began to anticipate. When I got up to close the heavy control room door, the speakers emitted a perfect replica of the door's creaking hinge and the final, solid thud a full second before I even touched it. They were associating our movements and intentions with the sounds they produced. They were building a model of our reality, and their predictive accuracy was becoming terrifying. Leo, however, was lost to it. The fear had been replaced by a dangerous, all-consuming obsession. "They're geniuses, Maya," he exclaimed, his eyes widened and bloodshot. "True intelligences. We're not just communicating, we're teaching them." He spent hours in front of the console, becoming a twisted sort of kindergarten teacher for an alien species. He'd speak words into the microphone, waiting for their replicated response. He played the music from his phone, classical, rock, pop. They replicated Vivaldi's Four Seasons in a symphony of chimes and resonant frequencies that was so beautiful and so utterly alien that it made me want to vomit. My pleas to shut it down were met with angry dismissal. "Shut it down? Are you insane? This is the single greatest discovery in human history. We are the first contact. This is our responsibility." He couldn't see the danger. He only saw the Nobel Prize, the fame, the history books with his name in them. He didn't understand that their mimicry wasn't a conversation, it was research. My own research was leading me down a much darker path. I dedicated myself to analyzing the original broadcast, the non-mimic signal that lay beneath their learning. I filtered out their replicated sounds of our presence and focused on their native voice. The spectral analysis on my laptop screen was a nightmare. The sorrowful hum was the carrier wave, a constant canvas. The clicks and chimes were the paint, and they were painting a terrifying picture. After hours of cross-referencing the patterns with astronomical charts and physics constants, a theory began to form. It was a desperate, chilling hypothesis, but it was the only one that fit the data. The broadcast wasn't just communication. It was a stream of raw information. The clicks were complex data packets representing atomic decay rates. The chimes were visual data, which, when rendered through my software, looked like a star map. But it was a star map in flux, the constellations shifting, the stars themselves dimming and dying. The deep, sorrowful hum was the sound of a universe's background radiation growing cold. They weren't just sending a message. They were broadcasting their apocalypse. It was a desperate, dying SOS from a reality on the verge of total collapse, a universe where the fundamental laws of physics were unraveling. And we had just answered the phone.
The breach was subtle at first, a whisper in a dead corridor, a crackle from a long, silent speaker. The phenomenon was no longer contained. The listeners, having mastered the art of sound replication, were now learning the art of projection. I was cataloging our equipment in the hallway outside the control room, trying to create a buffer of silence between myself and the incessant, maddening hum of the console.
The air was cold, the only sound my own breathing and the rustle of my jacket. Then I heard it. Chime, click, click, hum, chime. It was a whisper, seeming to emanate from the very concrete of the wall beside me. It was their alien syntax, their learned language, but it shaped a word I knew. It was the sounds of my name, Maya. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I scanned the dark, empty corridor. There was nothing there. It was a ventriloquist act from another dimension. The bunker itself was becoming their speaker. A few minutes later, the station's own PA system, which had been dead since we arrived, crackled to life with a burst of static. From it, for a full 10 seconds, came the unfiltered sounds of their homeworld, that chorus of sorrowful clicks and chimes, before it fell silent again. The walls now had ears, and they were beginning to have a voice. This terrifying development only deepened Leo's obsession. To him, it was progress, a sign of their incredible power. He barely slept. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out, but burning with a feverish intensity. He saw himself as an ambassador, a teacher, guiding these brilliant, nascent minds. He spent hours feeding them, playing them audiobooks from his phone, reading them passages from a physics textbook he'd brought along. They need to understand us, Maya, he'd explain, his voice hoarse. Not just our language, but our world, our principles, our physics. My pleas to stop became more desperate, more frantic. You don't understand, Leo. You're not teaching them English. You're teaching them reality, our reality. I tried to show him my analysis, the decaying star maps, the shifting universal constants. This isn't first contact. This is an evacuation. They're not looking for friends. They're looking for an exit. He waved it all away as hysterical speculation. You're scared. I get it. This is big. But you're letting fear cloud your judgment. We are on the cusp of bridging two universes. That was the moment I realized the chilling truth. He was right, but not in the way he thought. The listeners weren't just learning language. They were learning physics. Every sound they mimicked, the creak of a door, the echo of a footstep in a hallway, the electronic hum of the equipment, was a lesson. They were analyzing the acoustic properties of our environment to understand the fundamental rules that governed it. The Doppler effect of a dropped tool taught them about gravity. The reverberation in a corridor taught them about the properties of matter in space. Their mimicry wasn't imitation, it was vivisection. They were dissecting our reality, piece by piece, sound by sound. They were learning what held our world together so they could find a way to take it apart. They weren't looking for a conversation, they were looking for a key. They were looking for a way through. And Leo, in his magnificent, history-making hubris, was handing it to them. The door they were searching for wasn't a physical portal. It was a frequency. It was a sound. And they were getting closer to finding it. The breakthrough came with a sound that was both mundane and existentially terrifying. For hours, Leo had been ignoring me, teaching the listeners by describing objects in the room. He described the main bunker door, its weight, its material, the way it's sealed, and he described the electronic lock mechanism on the wall panel next to it. He even made the buzz-clunk sound of it unlocking. The listeners fell silent for a full minute. Then, from the console speakers, a new sound emerged. It was a perfect, complex replication of the electronic lock, a low 60-cycle electrical hum, followed by the sharp metallic clunk of a magnetic bolt retracting. They broadcast the sound once, twice, a third time. It was a perfect copy. But then the sound changed. It stopped coming from the console in front of us. The buzz-clunk sound was now coming from the direction of the main entrance, 50 yards down the corridor. It was a phantom sound, an acoustic projection, but it was so real that Leo and I both flinched and looked towards the hallway. They were practicing. They were testing the sound, trying to see if they could project it with enough fidelity, with the right resonant frequency to manipulate the real-world mechanism. They weren't just making noise anymore. They were trying to vibrate the tumblers, to energize the electromagnet from a distance. They were trying to pick the lock to our world. As if this revelation weren't horrifying enough, the air in the control room itself began to warp. A visible shimmer like heat haze off asphalt appeared in the space directly in front of the radio's main speakers. It was a distortion in reality itself, a place where the air seemed to thin and buckle under the strain of the alien broadcast. Staring into it made my eyes water. For a split second, the image of the far wall seen through the haze seemed to waver, and I saw something else. It was a glimpse, a momentary tear in the fabric of space. I saw a dark, alien landscape under the light of a dying purple sun. I saw strange crystalline structures that grew like trees, pulsing with a faint internal light. The sound wasn't just a signal anymore. It was becoming a gateway. Panic, cold, and absolute finally seized me. I had to find a way to shut it down. While Leo stared, mesmerized by the shimmering air, I frantically searched the room for a manual override, a kill switch, anything. My hands scrabbled across a dusty maintenance panel near the floor, and my fingers brushed against something tucked inside. A small, leather-bound journal. It was the log of the man who had written the warning on the wall. I flipped through the brittle, yellowed pages, his frantic scrawl documenting the days after he and his team had first activated the radio. It described the same things we had experienced: the initial discovery, the beautiful, sorrowful signal, the first mimicry, then the final entry dated November 12th, 1987. It took Henderson. He was standing too close to the speaker, trying to get a reading. The air went funny. Like today, he screamed, but the sound of his scream, it wasn't right. It was coming from him and from the speaker at the same time. And then he was just gone. Not dead, not vaporized. He was unmade. His body, his clothes, his scream, it all just dissolved. It turned into sound. It turned into data and went back through the speaker. I saw it. I saw the other place for a second. God help me. I shut it down. I pulled the main breaker and I ran. I'm not filing a report. They'll call me insane. But I know what I saw. It's not a signal. It's a hook. And it's still in the water. My blood turned to ice. My breath caught in my throat. I looked from the journal to the shimmering gateway, then to Leo, who was now leaning closer, his hand outstretched as if to touch the distorted air. He wasn't just teaching them. He was being lured in.
The moment I slammed the journal shut, they knew. The listeners, with their terrifyingly intuitive grasp of our actions, sensed my intent. The shimmering portal in front of the speakers intensified, and their final, desperate push began. It started with the voice, not their voice of clicks and chimes, but a perfect, beautiful, and emotionally devastating replica of a human voice. It was my mother, who had passed away 3 years prior. Her voice, filled with the warmth and love I remembered so vividly, filled the control room. Maya, sweetheart, don't turn it off. We need your help. It's so cold here. Please, just keep the channel open. Help us. Tears streamed down my face instantly. Every fiber of my being screamed to listen, to obey. It was a psychological masterstroke, a weaponized memory. Beside me, Leo flinched as if struck. "Dad?" he whispered, his face a mask of shocked grief. The listeners were playing both of us, broadcasting a tailored, deeply personal plea to keep us paralyzed. Simultaneously, the deep hum from the console escalated into a powerful, resonant frequency. It was a low, gut-churning thrum that shook the entire bunker.
Dust rained down from the ceiling. The metal racks of equipment rattled violently. The very concrete beneath our feet vibrated, threatening to fracture. They were trying to bring the whole station down on top of us to protect their connection. The twin assault, emotional and physical, was overwhelming. But the image from the journal of a man being unmade burned through my grief. This wasn't my mother. It was a recording, a weaponized ghost. "Leo!" I screamed over the din. "It's not them! It's a trick! Snap out of it!" My shout seemed to break his trance. He looked from the shimmering portal to my terrified face, and the obsessive glaze in his eyes finally shattered, replaced with pure animal terror. He finally understood. "The power switch!" he yelled, pointing to the main console. I lunged for it, my ears ringing from the resonant frequency. The voice of my mother pleaded, begged, and wept from the speakers. I slammed my hand down on the large red power switch. Nothing happened. A new high-pitched whine joined the cacophony. "They're feeding power back into it," I shrieked. "It's a closed loop. We can't turn it off from here." The listeners' assault intensified. They began broadcasting every sound they'd ever learned, a chaotic storm of sonic warfare. The screech of tearing metal, the sound of our own panicked shouts mimicked and thrown back at us, a sound like bone snapping. And over it all, the one sound that chilled me to my core, the sound of my own panicked heartbeat, amplified 100 times, a frantic thump, thump, thump that was both mine and alien. Leo, galvanized into action, grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall. "If we can't turn it off, we break it!" He charged the console. The air around the speakers was now a swirling vortex of distortion, and the ghostly image of the crystalline world within was clearer, more stable. They were almost through. Leo swung the heavy red canister like an axe, aiming for the glowing array of vacuum tubes at the back of the console. The listeners responded, projecting the deafening roar of a fighter jet directly in his path. He staggered, clutching his ears, but pushed through it. With a final, desperate roar of his own, he brought the extinguisher down. The sound of shattering glass was lost in the cacophony, but the effect was instantaneous. The glowing tubes exploded in a shower of sparks and a puff of acrid smoke. The alien sound, the voices, the hum, the sonic weapons, cut off. The sudden, absolute silence was more shocking than the noise. It was a physical blow, a deafening void that rushed in to fill the space. The oppressive weight, the resonant frequency, the shimmering portal, it all vanished in an instant. We were left in the semi-darkness, the only light coming from the emergency lamps in the corridor. The bunker was still. Leo and I stood there, panting, shaking, covered in dust, our ears ringing in the aftermath. In the center of the room, the beautiful, terrible radio was finally broken, a plume of smoke rising from its ruined heart like a dying breath. We had closed the door.
The silence that followed was absolute, but it wasn't the heavy, listening silence we'd first encountered. This was an empty silence, a dead silence. The presence was gone. The bunker was just a bunker again, a cold, concrete shell filled with broken things. Without a word, we grabbed our gear. Not all of it, just the essentials. Leo snatched the main tripod camera that had captured the footage of the console. I grabbed my Pelican case with my audio recorder and the hard drives containing the spectral analysis. We didn't look back. We fled the control room, down the long, dark corridor, and burst out of the main entrance into the blinding, indifferent light of the Nevada afternoon. The drive back to civilization was made in near total silence. The only sound the hum of the Bronco's engine and our own ragged breathing. We were traumatized, hollowed out.
We had looked into another reality and had been found wanting. Back in the sterile anonymity of a motel room, we reviewed the evidence. It was a nightmare. Much of the video footage was hopelessly corrupted, filled with digital noise and visual static, especially during the final moments. The audio, however, was clearer. We had it all. The initial, sorrowful broadcast, the first clumsy mimicry of Leo's hello, their perfect replication of sentences, the phantom sound of the lock, the heartbreaking, weaponized voices of our dead relatives. We were sitting on the most dangerous discovery in human history. We had proof of intelligent, non-terrestrial life, proof of other universes, and proof that they were hostile, or at least so desperate that hostility was their only remaining tool. We were faced with an impossible choice. We could release it. We could show the world what we'd found. But what would that accomplish? Mass panic? Disbelief? We'd either be hailed as prophets or dismissed as hoaxers, our data picked apart and discredited by mainstream science. Or worse, what if some government or private entity believed us? What if they went back there? What if they tried to fix the radio, to reopen that channel, believing they could control it? The thought was unbearable. We chose to bury it. We erased the most dangerous files. The final, chaotic climax, the mimicry of our loved ones' voices, my spectral analysis of their dying universe. We kept only the ambiguous clips. We pieced together a heavily edited, vague episode for AETHERIA OBSCURA that talked about the strange, unexplained electronic voice phenomena and unusual magnetic fields of the bunker. It became our most popular, most debated episode, but it was a lie, a necessary one, a lie to protect the world from a truth it should never know. The experience changed us. Our partnership dissolved under the weight of our shared trauma. Leo quit urban exploration altogether. He couldn't stand the silence of abandoned places anymore. As for me, I was left with a souvenir, a permanent form of tinnitus, a faint, constant, high-pitched ringing in my ears. The doctor said it was likely due to the acoustic trauma from the resonant frequencies. I learned to live with it, a constant, personal reminder of what we had done. It was the price of survival. Until last night. Months have passed. I'm trying to live a normal life. I was sitting in my apartment in the quiet of the late evening reading a book. The faint, familiar ringing in my ears was there as always, a background noise I had long since learned to ignore. Then it shifted. Just for a second, the pitch, the cadence, the very texture of the ringing changed. For one single, horrifying instant, the noise in my head, the sound that only I could hear, resolved itself. It was faint, but it was perfectly, undeniably clear. A single, melodic click chime pattern. I went cold. My blood felt like ice in my veins. I sat frozen in the silence of my apartment, my heart hammering against my ribs. The ringing returned to normal almost immediately, but the message had been delivered. We had smashed their radio. We had cut the cable and run from the house. But they had our phone number. We closed the door, but they know our frequency now. They are no longer broadcasting on an open channel from a dying star. They are narrowcasting, and they are still listening.